When a young boy walked into a flower shop to buy a bouquet of roses, his shaky hands carefully counted out his coins, only to realize he didn't have enough. Feeling defeated, he was about to leave empty-handed when Keanu Reeves, who happened to be there, stepped in. What happened next uncovered a heartwarming secret no one could have ever expected. But before we dive into the rest of this story, let us know where you're tuning in from, and if you love stories like this, hit that subscribe button because we've got another special one lined up for you. Tomorrow the flower shop was an enchanting place, almost magical, a little escape from the chaos of the bustling city. Nestled on the corner of a busy street, it seemed to call out to passers by, inviting them to pause and step inside. Its wide windows showcased an explosion of vibrant colors: deep reds, radiant yellows, delicate lilacs, and the sweet aroma of flowers spilled through the cracks, filling the air with a soft and comforting scent. Inside the space was meticulously arranged rustic wooden shelves held flawless bouquets, each wrapped in colorful tissue paper. Decorative pots were strategically placed on small pedestals, and a soft instrumental melody played in the background, amplifying the shop's peaceful atmosphere. Yet despite the harmony all around, the boy who had just stepped inside seemed out of place. He stood frozen near the entrance, shoulders hunched, a look of uncertainty clouding his face. He wore a faded green t-shirt and dark pants that bore signs of wear and tear. His sneakers were visibly scuffed, and he clutched an old backpack that had seen better days. His large dark eyes scanned the room cautiously, as if searching for something very specific. Taking a few hesitant steps toward the shop's main aisle, he ran his slender fingers over a bouquet of sunflowers. The sunlight streaming through the display window glinted off the yellow petals, but the boy seemed distant, lost in thought. After a moment, he averted his gaze and moved on, stopping in front of another arrangement. He hesitated, studying the flowers intently, yet he didn't dare touch them. That's when he saw it, the bouquet. It sat at the center of the main shelf, surrounded by smaller arrangements, a bouquet of red roses wrapped in golden paper with a satin ribbon tied in a flawless bow. The flowers were perfect, as though they'd just been picked. There was something about that bouquet that seemed to captivate the boy completely. He stood there staring at it as though locked in an internal battle. Finally he reached out and picked it up. His fingers trembled slightly as he held it. It was as though the bouquet carried an emotional weight far heavier than its physical one. Turning it carefully in his hands, he studied the details of the packaging, but his eyes inevitably landed on the small price tag. He frowned. He didn't need to calculate to know he didn't have enough. Even so, he took a deep breath, pressed the bouquet gently against his chest, and began walking toward the counter. Each step seemed slower than the last, as if part of him was urging him to turn back. When he reached the register, he placed the bouquet down with the utmost care, as though it were something precious and fragile. The clerk, a woman with a kind expression, offered him a warm smile. "That's one of our most beautiful bouquet," she said, trying to break the silence. The boy didn't respond. Instead, he opened his backpack and pulled out a handful of coins from the bottom. He started counting the money on the counter, sorting the coins into small piles. His hands trembled more with each coin, and his breathing grew heavier. The quiet in the shop was broken only by the sound of coins clinking against the wood. When he finished, he looked at the total, then back at the bouquet, and it became clear he had come up short. The clerk's smile faltered slightly as she glanced at the coins. "Sweetheart," she began gently, "this isn't enough for that bouquet." The boy blinked rapidly, as though fighting back tears. He lowered his gaze to the coins on the counter, then back to the bouquet, pressing his lips tightly together. He looked like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Taking a deep breath, he finally muttered, his voice barely audible, "I need these flowers." His voice cracked under the weight of his emotions, and tears began to well in his eyes. He clenched the straps of his backpack tightly, as though that would help him hold back the flood of emotions. It was clear that these flowers meant so much more to him than the clerk could have guessed. Then, breaking the uncomfortable Silence. A calm steady voice spoke up. From behind him. Maybe I can help. The boy turned quickly, startled, and saw a man standing near the shop's entrance. His hands were tucked casually into the pockets of a simple coat, and a serene smile graced his face. His slightly messy hair matched the relaxed air of someone who had just arrived but already understood the situation perfectly. The clerk glanced at the man with a mix of surprise and relief, while the boy, his tear-filled eyes wide with uncertainty, stood frozen. In that moment time seemed to stop, as if the world itself were holding its breath. But what happened next would change the course of this story forever. Keanu watched the boy, who still clutched the bouquet with both hands, as if the entire world depended on those flowers. His shoulders were hunched, his gaze fixed on the floor, as though he wanted to disappear. That's a beautiful bouquet, Keanu said softly, his voice casual, almost conversational, like he was talking about something ordinary. You've got good taste. The boy glanced at him but said nothing. His fingers tightened their grip on the stems of the bouquet. Are those flowers for a special occasion? Keanu asked, keeping his tone light but with a hint of genuine interest. The boy hesitated. He opened his mouth as if to answer, then stopped, swallowing his words. His eyes darted away, focusing on something far beyond Keanu. Keanu didn't push. Instead, he leaned slightly to the side, his posture relaxed, as though trying to ease the tension. You know, he began with a small reassuring smile, once I picked out flowers for someone and stood at the checkout for ages, just wondering if they were the right ones. It was kind of awkward. The boy looked at him again, this time with a mix of confusion and curiosity. And were they the right ones? He asked quietly. Keanu's smile deepened, warm and genuine that day. Absolutely. They made someone smile, and I think that's what really matters, don't you? The boy looked down at the bouquet in his hands. He still seemed wary, but the tension in his shoulders softened slightly. I really needed them, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, as if he was speaking more to himself than to Keanu. Sometimes we do, Ko replied gently. And it's good when someone gets that. The boy hugged the bouquet closer to his chest and took a step back. Thank you, he mumbled, almost as though he'd forgotten Kay was even there. Then quickly he turned and headed for the door. Keanu stood there for a moment, watching the boy leave the shop with the bouquet held tightly in his hands. There was something about him, the way he gripped the flowers, the desperation in his voice, that left Keanu unsettled. He glanced over at the clerk, who seemed equally puzzled before turning back toward the street, his thoughts already consumed by what had just unfolded. Something's not right, Keanu thought. Keanu stepped out of the flower shop just moments after the boy, keeping a safe distance as he followed him through the busy city streets. He wasn't entirely sure why he was doing this, but the boy's expression in the shop, the desperation in his eyes, the urgency in his voice had stuck with him. Something was wrong, and Keanu couldn't just walk away. The boy moved quickly, clutching the bouquet so tightly it seemed as if he feared someone might snatch it away. He glanced around nervously, as though checking for anyone following him or for some unseen threat that only heightened Keanu's suspicions. This boy wasn't just wandering aimlessly, he was either running from something or heading toward something very important. As they walked, the scenery began to shift. Initially they were in the bustling heart of the city, surrounded by shops and cafes, with the hum of car horns and chatter filling the air. But gradually the boy veered onto quieter streets where the shops were smaller and fewer people walked by. It became clear that he knew the route well, turning corners with the confidence of someone who had walked the path many times before. They passed a small, dimly lit park, its benches empty and its trees casting long shadows on the pavement. The silence was broken only by the hurried rhythm of the boy's steps and Keanu's slower, more deliberate pace behind him. Each turn the boy took only deepened Keanu's curiosity. After about 15 minutes of walking, the boy finally stopped in front of a large, imposing building. Keanu hung back, observing from a distance. When he looked up at the facade, he realized it was a hospital. The fluorescent lights above the entrance illuminated the building's name in bold letters making it clear this wasn't just a casual visit. The boy hesitated for a moment at the entrance, clutching the bouquet even tighter. His eyes darted around, scanning the area as if searching for something or someone. Keanu leaned casually against a nearby post, pretending to be distracted, but his focus never left the boy. After a few seconds, the boy took a deep breath and stepped inside. Keanu stood there briefly, processing what he'd just seen. He knew that following the boy inside might cross a boundary, invading what was clearly a personal moment, but something about the boy's behavior gnawed at him. He had to understand what was happening. Taking a deep breath, Keanu crossed the street and walked into the hospital. The hospital lobby was bustling with activity, people moving in every direction. The sound of muffled voices blended with the ringing of phones and the echo of hurried footsteps. Keanu scanned the room, searching for the boy. It didn't take long to spot him. The bouquet of vibrant red roses stood out starkly against the sterile white walls. The boy was stepping into an elevator. Keanu quickened his pace, but arrived just as the door slid shut. Frustrated, he glanced at the elevator panel and noticed the last button pressed. Second floor. Without hesitation, he headed for the stairs, moving quickly but quietly. On the second floor, the atmosphere was noticeably calmer. Signs on the walls pointed to different sections of the hospital, but one caught Keanu's attention: intensive care unit. He followed the hallway toward the ICU, his senses heightened with every step. The silence here was almost eerie, broken only by the occasional sound of a nurse's footsteps or the faint beeping of medical machines coming from the rooms. Finally, Keanu spotted the boy. He was standing in front of a door marked Room 214, clutching the bouquet with both hands. His posture was stiff, as though he was gathering the courage to step inside. Keanu stopped at the end of the hallway, keeping his distance while quietly observing. After a few moments, the boy took a deep breath, opened the door and walked in. Keanu moved a little closer, careful not to draw attention, and peered through the small window on the door. Inside the room, a woman lay in a hospital bed, hooked up to various machines. Her face was pale, almost colorless. The boy placed the bouquet on the small table beside her bed and then gently took her hand, holding it with a tenderness that seemed far beyond his ears. He didn't say anything, but his expression spoke volumes, an unspoken mix of hope, love, and despair. Keanu stood frozen, watching the scene unfold, a tightness growing in his chest. It all made sense now: the boy's desperation at the flower shop, his urgency to bring those roses here. They weren't just flowers, they were his way of saying something words couldn't convey. The connection between the boy and the woman was almost tangible, and Keanu felt like an intruder witnessing such a deeply personal moment. But something still didn't sit right: the boy's nervous behavior, the way he constantly looked over his shoulder. There was more to this story than what was visible. Just then, Keanu noticed a nurse exiting a nearby room. He approached her cautiously, keeping his voice low. "Excuse me," he said, "do you know who's in room 24? I'm trying to understand a situation." The nurse frowned slightly, her expression guarded. "Are you family?" "Not exactly," Keanu admitted, choosing his words carefully, "but the boy who just went in there, he seems like he might need help. I just want to understand what's going on." The nurse hesitated, studying him for a moment before finally sighing. "The woman in there is his mother," she said quietly. "She's in critical condition. He comes to visit her whenever he can, always brings flowers. I think it's the only thing he feels he can do for her right now." A lump formed in Keanu's throat as he glanced back at the boy through the window. The boy was now SESE beside his mother, still holding her hand, his expression filled with both determination and heartbreak. It wasn't just a child trying to make someone smile, it was a boy carrying a burden far too heavy for someone his age. Keanu thanked the nurse and stepped back, giving the boy some space. But as he watched the scene unfold, something caught his eye. The boy leaned closer to his mother, whispering something in her ear, then gently placed the bouquet on the table beside her. What happened next left Keanu speechless. The woman's eyes fluttered open just for a Moment she turned her gaze to the boy. And her expression softened not dramatically but enough to show that those flowers and the boy's presence meant everything to her. It was a small, fragile moment of connection, but it carried an enormous weight, and in that instant Keanu knew he couldn't just walk away from the story. Keanu stood frozen inside the ICU door, his heart heavy with what he just witnessed. But as he turned to leave, he noticed something strange. The boy was no longer alone. Keanu stood in the corridor for a few moments, trying to process what he had just witnessed. The way the boy held his mother's hand, the delicate care with which he placed the flowers beside her, it all carried an emotional weight so heavy it was almost tangible. Even without knowing the full story, Keanu could sense there was something profoundly special about their bond. The silence of the corridor was broken by a soft voice. It was the same nurse he had spoken to earlier, now approaching him with a calmer expression. "You're still here?" she asked, not seeming surprised. "It's hard not to feel moved by their situation, isn't it?" Keanu nodded, but his curiosity pushed him to ask more questions. "You mentioned her condition is serious. What exactly happened?" The nurse sighed, glancing briefly at the door to room 214. "She had a collapse a few months ago. Turns out she has a severe heart condition. The surgery to save her life is urgent, but the family doesn't have the resources to pay for it. That boy, he's remarkable. He comes here as often as he can, brings those flowers, holds her hand and talks to her quietly like he's trying to keep her spirits alive." Keanu felt a lump form in his throat. He turned back to the window and saw the boy sitting by his mother's bedside, his head bowed as he held her fragile hands. "Is there any way the hospital can help? Any resources that could be used for her?" he asked, his voice thick with concern. The nurse shook her head, frustration evident in her eyes. "Unfortunately no, it's a delicate situation. He's just a kid and it seems like they don't have anyone else to help. The hospital does what it can, but without the necessary funds all we can provide are palliative measures." "You thank the nurse." As she walked away to attend to other patients, he stood there for a while longer, staring through the window at the boy. It was impossible not to feel the weight of the scene. That boy, with all his vulnerability, was fighting to give his mother something she might never have had: unconditional love in the face of immense pain. Keanu knew he couldn't just walk away outside the hospital. Keanu stood on the sidewalk, taking a deep breath. He was used to small act of kindness, paying for someone's flowers, offering a smile, being a source of comfort, but this was different. There was something in the way that boy looked at his mother that made Keanu feel a responsibility he couldn't ignore. He pulled out his phone and began making calls. He needed to understand the family situation fully and figure out exactly what it would take to change it. The next morning Keanu returned to the hospital. He'd spent the night reflecting on the boy's story and planning his next steps. As he walked onto the second floor, he spotted the boy again. This time the boy was sitting on a bench in the hallway, the bouquet now tucked into his backpack. Keanu approached slowly, careful not to startle him. "Hey," he said softly, his voice calm and friendly. The boy looked up quickly, his eyes widening slightly as he recognized Keanu. He tightened his grip on the straps of his backpack as if bracing for something. "You're here again?" he asked in a quiet voice. "Yeah," Keanu replied, sitting down beside him. "I wanted to check on you, see how you're doing." The boy shrugged, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I'm fine. It's my mom who's sick." Keanu stayed silent for a moment, giving the boy space to say more if he wanted to, and eventually he did. "She always loved roses," the boy said, almost as if talking to himself. I don't know what else to do. I think they remind her of good things, so I bring her flowers every day if I can." Keanu felt his throat tighten at the boy's words. "You're doing more than most people ever would," he said sincerely. "I'm sure it means the world to her." The boy nodded slowly but didn't respond. Keanu studied him, noticing how tired he looked, not just physically but emotionally. It was the kind of exhaustion no child should have to endure. "Listen," Keanu said gently, "I want to help you, but to do that, I need you to tell me exactly what's going on. What do you say? The boy looked at him with a mixture of skepticism and vulnerability, as if weighing whether Keanu could be trusted. Finally he sighed. The surgery my mom needs, it costs a lot. The hospital said they can't do it unless we pay. First, my dad, he left a long time ago. There's no one else to help, so I thought maybe if I showed her that she still matters, she'd stay strong, and maybe that would be enough. Keanu felt the weight of those words hit him like a punch to the gut. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. I understand, he said, his voice steady, and I promise you don't have to face this alone. The boy stared at him, startled. What do you mean? Keanu offered him a small reassuring smile. Trust me, I'm going to help your mom, and I'm going to help you, but first I need all the details. As Keanu looked into the boy's eyes, he knew his decision was made, but what he was about to face would test everything he believed in, including the strength of his own heart. Keanu left the hospital with a heavy heart but a firm resolve. Each step he took on the sidewalk reinforced the decision he just made. He didn't have all the answers yet, but he was certain of one thing: he would do everything in his power to help that boy and his mother. This wasn't just a gesture of kindness, it was a deeply personal commitment. That evening Keanu sat at his desk, jotting down a list of things he needed to figure out. He knew that to truly help he had to understand every detail: the cost of the surgery, the family's circumstances, and most importantly, how to ensure the boy wouldn't have to shoulder this burden alone. He picked up his phone and made his first call to a trusted contact, someone who knew the ins and outs of the healthcare system. Hey, it's me, Keanu said. I need a favor. Can you help me get some information about a critical patient? It's a sensitive situation. The person on the other end agreed without hesitation, knowing Keanu wouldn't ask unless it was important. Keanu briefly explained the situation, providing what little details he had: the boy's name, the room number, and the hospital. Let me know as soon as you find anything, he said. I'll take care of the rest. The next morning Keanu returned to the hospital. He didn't want to overwhelm the boy, but he knew he needed more information. As he approached the second floor, he saw the boy sitting on the same bench as the day before, staring at the ground with his backpack beside him. He looked even more worn out. Keanu approached slowly, stopping at a respectful distance. Hey, he said softly. The boy looked up quickly, recognizing him. You again? He asked, his tone a mix of surprise and caution. Yeah, me again, Keanu replied with a small smile. Mind if I sit here? The boy shrugged, and Keanu sat beside him for a few moments. Neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, it was charged with unspoken meaning. You here to see your mom again? Keanu finally asked, breaking the silence gently. The boy nodded. I come whenever I can. I don't know if she notices, but I think it's important. Keanu took a deep breath. I want to help you, he said, his voice steady but kind, but I need to know more about what's going on. The boy hesitated, aided, looking at Keanu and then back at the floor as though weighing whether to trust him. Finally he sighed and began to speak. She needs surgery, her heart, they said. It's really bad that she won't make it without it, but we don't have the money. The hospital said they can't do it unless we pay. First his voice faltered, but he pushed on. I tried asking for help, but no one cares. Keanu felt a knot tighten in his throat. He placed a comforting hand on the boy's shoulder. You've already done more than most people would. Now let me take it from here. The boy looked at him skeptically. You say that, but no one can really help. It's too expensive. Keanu offered a gentle smile. Trust me, I'll take care of it back at home. Keanu immediately got to work. His contact from the hospital had called him back with more details. The surgery is expensive, the contact explained. We're talking about $50,000 plus there are hospitalization and medication costs, and she's running out of time. Keanu thanked them for the information and hung up. The weight of the number sinking in, but it didn't deter him. He opened his laptop and got to work. The first thing he did was transfer the full amount needed for the surgery to the hospital's account, ensuring that all costs would be covered. He didn't want the family to know it was him. He preferred to remain anonymous. Next he wrote a simple message on a card, which he asked the hospital staff to deliver to the boy's mother. The card read, "You are loved, don't give up." It was signed simply, "A friend." The following morning Keanu returned to the hospital. This time he didn't go straight to the second floor. Instead he stopped by the reception desk and spoke with one of the nurses in charge of the ICU. "I want to make sure everything is handled carefully," he explained, sharing the details without revealing his name. The nurse nodded, clearly moved by his gesture. "Don't worry, sir, we'll make sure the family is informed when the time is right." Keanu thanked her and made his way to the second floor. He didn't approach the boy this time, choosing instead to watch from a distance as he entered his mother's room with the same bouquet of roses. There was something about the boy, a quiet resilience that filled Keanu with admiration. That evening the hospital called the family with the news the costs of the surgery had been fully covered by a generous anonymous donor. The boy was sitting in his mother's room when the nurse came in to deliver the message. "You have a miracle," she said gently. "The surgery is scheduled for tomorrow." The boy looked at his mother, who despite her weakness managed a faint smile. He didn't fully understand what was happening, but for the first time in what felt like forever he felt a spark of hope. As Keanu walked away from the hospital that night, he looked up at the dark sky and took a deep breath. For the first time in days he felt like he'd done something meaningful, but deep down he knew this story was far from over. Outside the room Keanu stood at a distance, respectfully observing the intimate moment between mother and son. Leaning against the corridor wall with his arms crossed, he reflected on everything that had unfolded over the past few days. He couldn't quite explain what had drawn him to this family, but he knew that his decision to intervene had profoundly changed not only their lives, but also his own. As he stood lost in thought, the nurse who had helped him earlier approached with a warm smile. "You've truly made a difference for this family," she said. "I don't know how they'll ever thank you." Keanu shook his head slightly. "I didn't do it for the thanks," he replied sincerely. "I just saw a boy trying to save the person he loves most in the world. That was reason enough." The nurse smiled, clearly moved by his humility. "Well, I hope you know that what you've done here won't be forgotten. Sometimes all people need is a little hope." A few days later the boy's mother was discharged from the hospital. While she still needed time to recover at home, the worst was behind them. Keanu returned to the hospital one last time to say goodbye to the boy and his mother. He brought with him a small gift, a potted vase of red roses. The boy saw Keanu approaching in the hallway and ran to him, throwing his arms around his waist. "Thank you," he said, his voice full of emotion, "for everything." Keanu knelt down to meet his gaze, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You were the one who made the difference," he said with a genuine smile. "I just gave you a little push." The boy's mother, still seated in a wheelchair, looked at Keanu with tearful eyes filled with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice still faint but brimming with emotion. "You've given us a second chance." Keanu smiled and handed her the vase of roses. "Thank your son, he never gave up on you, even when things seemed impossible." She looked at her son with tears streaming down her face, and he responded with a shy smile. It was a moment none of them would ever forget. This story was created to entertain and inspire reflections on the values of generosity and the impact we can have on others. We chose Reeves as the protagonist because of our deep admiration for him, a man who, even in an industry where values are often overlooked, has always been generous, humble and genuine. This story serves as a reminder that just like him, every small act of kindness has the potential to transform someone's day or even their life. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, we're certain you'll love the next one we've chosen for you, now appearing on your screen. See you in the next video.